Can I ask, first of all, your reflections on where we are in 2023? 25 years is a significant amount of time. We're not, are we, where we wanted to be a quarter of a century on from the Good Friday Agreement?
Not very many people in many places are as far forward as they would have liked to hope 25 years ago. And it's certainly true of Northern Ireland. But let's reflect. There were two processes that were going on here. One was a peace process. That was about bringing the killing to an end. And that has been extremely successful. There are still some people who want to take us to the bad old days, but they're not succeeding and they're not going to succeed. The peace process was successful. Then there was a political process, and that's been less successful for a number of reasons. First of all, because it was difficult for people to work together who had memories of being abused each by the other side. Secondly, we had Brexit, and while it was promised it wouldn't make any difference, it has, of course, made an enormous difference because of the issues of the border between East and West, as well as between North and South. And, of course, there's also been a major change in politics. Dougie Beattie there referred to the Ulster Unionists and the SDLP. The Alliance Party that I led for many years now has as many MLAs, members of the Assembly, as those two parties put together. There's been a very significant increase in those who don't want to describe themselves as either unionist or nationalist. And the Belfast Agreement doesn't really facilitate that development. And that's one of the reforms that does need to be made over the next few years.
Lord Alderdice, we're looking back 25 years to 1998 and negotiating that agreement. And there were, of course, so many challenges around that time. And you were a key player in that Irish peace process. Can you tell us about your reflections of that time and the challenges that surrounded it?
The first thing is to recognise that it wasn't just a matter of a couple of years of negotiating. Some of us had been involved for many years in trying to put together both the relationships that needed resolved and the arrangements, the political arrangements. Of course, we had enormous help from, let's not forget, John Major and Albert Reynolds, before Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair, from particularly President Clinton and George Mitchell, the chairman. But it was still very difficult. And I well remember that even a matter of a day or two before Good Friday of 1998, none of us were sure that we were going to get it across the line. It was that difficult. It was that contentious, particularly, but not exclusively, in the Unionist Party and within the Ulster Unionist Party. So that's the first thing. The second thing is implementation of the agreement turned out to be much more difficult than I think we had expected. George Mitchell told us that the implementation was going to be very difficult. He, as he was in so many things, was absolutely right. And when I was Speaker of the Assembly, we had a lot of challenges to overcome. But I suppose the third thing we hadn't really bargained for was the fact that the framework of relationships between the British and Irish governments within the European Union would be disrupted. And that happened with Brexit. And we're still trying to find ways of getting over that. Although I have to say that unlike his two or three predecessors, Rishi Sunak has been very successful at resetting the relationship with the European Union and the relationship with the United States. He has not yet been successful in getting the Democratic Unionists to work the Assembly, and that's the next big challenge.
See, it's interesting when you talk about the challenges that you face. As you rightly said, Senator Mitchell highlighted this, but seeing it in reality is a whole different kettle of fish, isn't it? But so much has been overcome, particularly in the early days of the Good Friday Agreement being implemented. Does that give you faith? I think
you're absolutely right about that. Something that people need to remember. Negotiating in the middle of and after a huge, long, violent campaign is far more difficult than the process of negotiating now. We should be able to overcome the problems of the moment because they're not in the context of a violent terrorist campaign. And people need to remember that was the biggest difficulty we faced, and it's not a difficulty we have to face in the same way now.